Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in Montana Territory history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know to what places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The first mention of Uriah Blackthorn appears in a worn ledger book, discovered in 1868 during the demolition of an abandoned mining office in Bannack. The handwriting, cramped and faded, records his claim registration on March 15, 1857. Lot number 43, Bear Creek Drainage, approximately 12 miles northeast of what would later become Virginia City. The clerk noted in the margin, "Peculiar fellow, paid in advance for winter provisions, requested no visitors." Bear Creek ran cold and clear through a narrow valley surrounded by pine-covered ridges. The terrain was harsh, even by Montana Territory standards. Rocky outcroppings jutted from steep hillsides like broken teeth. Ancient avalanche scars marked the mountainsides where whole forests had been swept away decades earlier. It was the kind of place where a man could work a claim in complete solitude, hearing nothing but the sound of rushing water and his own breathing. Blackthorn's background remains largely a mystery. No record exists of his arrival in the territory, though several accounts suggest he came from the California goldfields. A letter found in the effects of deceased merchant Samuel Henderson mentions selling mining equipment to a tall man with coal-black hair and peculiar pale eyes in late February of 1857. Henderson described him as soft-spoken, but noted that his hands bore the distinctive calluses of a man who had spent considerable time wielding a pick and shovel. The early months of Blackthorn's time at Bear Creek passed without incident. Twice-monthly supply runs to Bannack provided the only human contact he seemed to seek. Store owner Margaret Kelly later recalled that he always arrived alone, paid in gold dust, and spoke only when necessary to conduct business. He purchased unusual items for a solitary miner: extra rope, iron spikes, and, on one occasion, a substantial quantity of black powder typically used for blasting operations. "He had a way of looking at you," Kelly told her daughter years later. "Not unfriendly, mind you, but like he was measuring something you couldn't see." The first claim jumper arrived in early July. Patrick Malloy, according to the fragmentary records that survive, had worked claims throughout the California and Nevada territories before drifting into Montana. He was known among the mining camps as a man who preferred to take over existing diggings rather than start from scratch. Witnesses in Bannack reported seeing him studying the claim records for several days before heading up Bear Creek. What happened during the first week of July remains unclear. No contemporaneous accounts exist of the confrontation between Blackthorn and Malloy. What is known comes from a journal entry found decades later, written in Blackthorn's distinctive handwriting. "Visitor came today. Explained to him the importance of respecting boundaries. He seemed to understand." Malloy never returned to Bannack. When asked about him weeks later, other miners assumed he had moved on to new diggings, as was common in those fluid times. The restless nature of the prospecting life meant that men appeared and disappeared regularly, following rumors of strikes or simply growing weary of unproductive claims. The second incident occurred in late July. Two men named William Foster and James Creek had been working a marginal claim about 8 miles downstream when they heard rumors of rich color being found near Blackthorn's site. Foster had a reputation for aggressive tactics in claim disputes, while Creek was known more for following Foster's lead than for independent thinking. A merchant in Bannack recorded selling them provisions for a week in the high country on July 23rd. They were seen heading up the Bear Creek Trail the following morning, their pack mules loaded with mining equipment and enough supplies for an extended stay. Neither man returned. Their absence went unnoticed for nearly 2 weeks, until another prospector found their abandoned pack animals wandering the valley floor. The mules bore no signs of injury, but their loads had been carefully removed and stacked beside the trail. Personal items remained undisturbed, including Foster's distinctive tobacco pouch and Creek's silver-handled knife. A search party formed in Bannock on August 10th. 5 men rode up Bear Creek, following the trail to where the pack animals had been found. From there, they proceeded on foot toward Blackthorn's claim, calling out as they approached. They found him working his sluice box, appearing genuinely surprised to see them. When asked about the missing men, Blackthorn expressed concern and offered to help with the search. He guided the party around his workings, pointing out areas where inexperienced miners might have met with accidents. Bear Creek ran deep and fast through several rocky gorges. A man could easily slip and be swept away, especially if unfamiliar with the terrain. The search continued for 2 days without result. Blackthorn proved himself a capable guide, demonstrating detailed knowledge of the surrounding area. He showed them hidden ravines and dangerous cliff faces where careless prospectors might have fallen. His helpfulness impressed the search party members, who later described him as genuinely concerned about the missing men. "He knew every rock and tree in that valley," recalled search party member Thomas Bradley years later. "Never saw a man more at home in wild country." The third disappearance occurred in early September. Charles Hoffman, a German immigrant who had arrived in Montana Territory only months earlier, filed notice of his intention to work a claim adjacent to Blackthorn's holdings. The claim registration office recorded his filing on September 4th, along with a note that he had studied the area maps extensively before making his decision. Hoffman differed from the previous men in several respects. He was older, more methodical, and had a reputation for thorough research before committing to any venture. Unlike the others, he made no secret of his intentions, openly discussing his plans with anyone who would listen. He believed the geology indicated rich deposits extending from Blackthorn's successful diggings onto the unclaimed land beside them. Hoffman was no claim jumper, merchant Samuel Henderson later testified. He filed proper papers and planned to work ground that belonged to no one. But he did seem mighty interested in what Blackthorn was pulling out of his claim. Hoffman departed Bannock on September 8th with enough supplies for a month's work. He had purchased new equipment, including a rocker box of his own design and several innovative tools he had ordered from suppliers back east. His preparations suggested a man planning for long-term operations rather than a quick raid on another's claim. The pattern repeated itself. Hoffman failed to return when expected. His credit arrangements with local merchants went unpaid. His boarding house room remained empty, personal belongings undisturbed. When concerned parties investigated, they found his campsite abandoned, but showing no signs of violence or hurried departure. His equipment had been neatly stacked and covered with canvas, as if he had simply stepped away for a brief errand. By now, the disappearances had attracted attention beyond the immediate mining community. The Territorial Marshal's office in Virginia City received reports of multiple missing persons, all connected to the Bear Creek area. Deputy Marshal William Dobbs made the journey to Bannock in late September to investigate personally. Dobbs was a careful man with experience in law enforcement dating back to his service in Kansas Territory. He interviewed merchants, fellow miners, and anyone else who had contact with the missing men. His notes, preserved in the Territorial Archives, reveal a methodical investigation that considered various possibilities: accidental deaths, Indian attacks, banditry, and simple decisions to leave the area without notice. The missing men shared one common factor, Dobbs wrote in his report. All had shown interest in claims near or adjacent to Uriah Blackthorn's holdings. Beyond this connection, no clear pattern emerges. Dobbs rode out to Bear Creek on September 28th, accompanied by local guide Timothy Walsh and prospector Samuel Garrett, who knew the area well. They found Blackthorn working his claim, operating the same basic equipment that had been observed there for months. His diggings showed consistent progress, with neat piles of processed gravel and a well-maintained water diversion system. The marshal questioned Blackthorne extensively about each missing man. Blackthorne admitted to brief encounters with all three, but claimed no detailed knowledge of their plans or activities. He expressed regret about their disappearances and again offered to assist with any searches. His manner appeared cooperative and concerned. "Blackthorne struck me as a competent man who knew his business," Dobbs noted. "He answered questions directly and showed no signs of deception." His claim showed evidence of steady, productive work over several months. The investigation expanded to include examination of Blackthorne's campsite and immediate surroundings. Dobbs and his companions found a well-organized operation. A sturdy cabin had been constructed using local timber and stone. Tools were properly maintained and stored. Food supplies appeared adequate but not excessive. Nothing suggested the presence of additional occupants, past or present. However, Dobbs noted several unusual features in his report. The cabin had been built with multiple exit routes, including a concealed opening in the rear wall that led to a narrow ravine. The main entrance was positioned to provide clear views of all approaches to the claim. Most unusually, several areas around the workings showed signs of recent excavation that didn't appear related to gold mining. "These secondary diggings puzzled me," Dobbs wrote. When questioned, Blackthorne explained them as test holes for potential expansion of his operations. The explanation seemed reasonable, though the locations struck me as poorly chosen for that purpose. The marshal's investigation continued for a week, without producing evidence of criminal activity. Blackthorne maintained his helpful demeanor and continued his regular work routine. He demonstrated detailed knowledge of mining techniques and showed genuine expertise in hydraulic operations. His gold production, based on his periodic sales in Bannock, suggested a moderately successful claim rather than the extraordinary richness that might attract claim jumpers. Before departing, Dobbs arranged for periodic checks on the area by local law enforcement. He also posted notices in Bannock warning prospectors to exercise caution when working claims in remote areas. His final report concluded that while the disappearances remained unexplained, no evidence supported charges against Blackthorne or anyone else. The fourth incident occurred on October 15th. Two brothers, Michael and Robert Hayes, arrived in Bannock, claiming to have information about rich placer deposits in the Bear Creek drainage. They had apparently received this information from Charles Hoffman before his disappearance, possibly through correspondence sent to relatives back east. The Hayes brothers were experienced miners who had worked throughout the Western Territories. Unlike previous visitors to the area, they came well armed and made no secret of their suspicions regarding Blackthorne. They publicly announced their intention to investigate what they called the mysterious happenings up Bear Creek. "Those boys were spoiling for trouble," recalled saloon-keeper Daniel Murphy. "They talked big about how they weren't going to be scared off by ghost stories and missing men, said they could handle whatever they found up there." The brothers departed Bannock on October 17th with enough supplies for 2 weeks. They had purchased additional ammunition and insisted on sharing their planned route with multiple people in town. Their precautions suggested men who expected to encounter danger. 3 days later, Michael Hayes returned alone. His appearance shocked those who saw him. His clothes were torn, his face bore scratches from running through thick brush, and his hands trembled as he tried to explain what had happened. According to multiple witnesses, he appeared genuinely terrorized. Hayes told a confused story of approaching Blackthorne's claim and finding his brother Robert missing from their camp during the night. He claimed to have searched the area extensively, but found no trace of Robert or any explanation for his disappearance. When pressed for details, Hayes became agitated and refused to elaborate. He kept saying, "It's not natural," "And no man could do such things," reported merchant Margaret Kelly. "But when we asked what he meant, he just shook his head and said we wouldn't believe him." Hayes left Bannock the following day, despite efforts to convince him to guide a search party back to Bear Creek. He headed south, reportedly telling the stage driver that he was done with Montana Territory forever. No subsequent records of Robert Hayes were found, and efforts to contact Michael Hayes at addresses he had provided proved unsuccessful. The Hayes incident marked a turning point in local attitudes toward Blackthorn and the Bear Creek area. What had previously been regarded as unfortunate accidents or simple departures now took on more sinister implications. Conversations in Bannock's saloons and boarding houses increasingly focused on speculation about what might really be happening in that remote valley. Territorial authorities faced pressure to take stronger action. Deputy Marshal Dobbs received orders to conduct a more thorough investigation with authorization to arrest Blackthorn if evidence warranted such action. A second expedition was organized for early November, this time including additional law enforcement personnel and experienced tracking specialists. The investigation party consisted of 6 men: Deputy Marshal Dobbs, Territorial Investigator Henry Morrison, Tracker Joseph Standing Bear, and 3 local volunteers with extensive knowledge of the region. They departed Virginia City on November 5th, equipped for an extended stay in the field. The party approached Bear Creek cautiously, taking time to examine the surrounding terrain for any evidence related to the missing men. Standing Bear proved especially valuable in this effort, identifying subtle signs that others had missed during previous searches. His tracking skills revealed evidence of multiple human passages through the area, some recent and others dating back several months. "Standing Bear found things that made my blood run cold," Morrison later wrote in his official report. "Boot prints that started on established trails but seemed to simply vanish in solid rock areas. Torn fabric caught on branches at impossible heights. Signs of digging in places where no reasonable explanation existed for such activity." The party made camp approximately 2 miles downstream from Blackthorn's claim and began systematic surveillance of his activities. For 3 days, they observed his routine through field glasses, noting his work patterns and movements around the site. Blackthorn appeared to maintain normal mining operations, though he seemed more alert than during previous visits by law enforcement. On the 4th day, the investigators approached the claim openly. Blackthorn greeted them cordially, expressing surprise at seeing another law enforcement visit so soon after the previous one. He offered coffee and answered their questions with apparent cooperation. However, Morrison noted subtle changes in his demeanor compared to previous encounters. Blackthorn seemed more guarded this time. Morrison wrote, "He still answered questions, but I sensed he was choosing his words more carefully. There was a tension in him that hadn't been there before, like a man who knew he was being watched." The investigators requested permission to examine areas around the claim more thoroughly than had been done previously. Blackthorn agreed, but suggested they exercise caution due to unstable ground conditions in some areas. He offered to guide them personally, pointing out specific hazards and safe routes through the terrain. During this examination, Standing Bear made a discovery that changed the entire investigation. While exploring a ravine approximately 300 yards from Blackthorn's cabin, he found human remains partially concealed beneath a rockfall. The bones appeared to have been there for several months and showed signs of deliberate concealment rather than natural burial. The discovery was reported immediately to the other investigators. Careful excavation revealed additional remains, suggesting multiple individuals had been buried in the same general area. Personal effects found among the bones included items that matched descriptions of belongings carried by the missing men. Blackthorn was informed of the discovery and asked to explain the presence of human remains on or near his claim. His response marked the first time he had shown genuine surprise during any law enforcement encounter. He appeared shocked and claimed complete ignorance of the burials. He looked like a man who had been struck by lightning, Dobbs recorded. Either he was completely innocent of knowledge about those remains, or he was the finest actor I ever encountered. The investigation shifted to focus on determining the cause of death and circumstances surrounding the burials. The remote location and advanced decomposition made detailed forensic examination impossible with available resources. However, several observations suggested the deaths had not resulted from accidents or natural causes. Standing Bear's examination of the remains revealed evidence that at least one individual had suffered trauma consistent with violence. Broken bones showed patterns typical of blunt force injuries rather than falls or other accidents. The careful concealment of the bodies also argued against accidental death. Blackthorne was taken into custody pending further investigation. He maintained his innocence and continued to express shock at the discovery of the remains. His cooperation with investigators remained complete, and he answered all questions about his activities and knowledge of the missing men. "I've arrested many guilty men," Morrison later wrote, and Blackthorne's reactions didn't fit the usual patterns. He seemed genuinely bewildered by the whole situation, like a man trying to solve the same mystery we were. And Drames, a more extensive search of the area, revealed additional evidence that suggested systematic disposal of bodies over an extended period. Secondary burial sites contained remains that appeared much older than those of the recent missing men. Some bones showed weathering consistent with burial dating back several years, possibly predating Blackthorne's arrival in the territory. This discovery complicated the investigation significantly. If the older remains predated Blackthorne's presence at Bear Creek, then either he was innocent of at least some of the deaths, or he had continued a pattern of violence established by someone else. The possibility that multiple killers had operated in the same location seemed unlikely, but could not be dismissed. Territorial authorities ordered a comprehensive investigation of the area's history. Records research revealed that Bear Creek had been the site of previous mining activity dating back to 1854. Several claims had been registered and abandoned before Blackthorne's arrival. The identity of previous claim holders and their ultimate fate became subjects of intense investigation. Church records from Bannock provided partial information about early prospectors in the area. Father Benedict Mueller, who had served the mining camps since 1855, recalled performing funeral services for prospectors who had reportedly died in mining accidents. His record showed burial ceremonies for men whose bodies were never recovered, explained at the time by the dangerous nature of their work. Father Mueller's records showed a pattern, investigator Morrison noted. Every 6 months or so, reports would come in about prospectors who had died in accidents around Bear Creek. Bodies were never recovered, supposedly swept away by the current or lost in rock slides. At the time, such explanations seemed reasonable. No. The investigation expanded to examine these earlier reported deaths. Witness interviews revealed that most of the supposedly accidental deaths had involved men working alone or in small groups in the Bear Creek area. In each case, fellow prospectors had reported finding evidence of accidents but no bodies. More disturbing, several witnesses recalled that reports of rich gold deposits in the Bear Creek drainage had circulated regularly during the 1854 to 1856 period. These rumors had drawn numerous prospectors to the area, many of whom subsequently disappeared or reported finding claims already taken by mysterious operators. It seemed like every few months, someone would come back from Bear Creek with stories about colors so rich they didn't want to believe it themselves, recalled retired prospector James Sullivan. But when others went to check it out, they'd either find nothing or just never come back. The pattern suggested that someone had been using reports of gold discoveries to lure prospectors to the remote area for several years before Blackthorne's documented arrival. Whether Blackthorne had inherited this operation or simply coincidentally chosen the same location remained unclear. Under pressure from territorial authorities and facing mounting evidence of multiple homicides, Blackthorne's legal position became increasingly precarious. However, he maintained his innocence and continued to cooperate with investigators. His behavior remained consistent with that of a man genuinely confused by the accusations against him. Defense attorney William Crawford, appointed to represent Blackthorne, argued that the evidence was entirely circumstantial. The discovery of remains on or near Blackthorne's claim proved nothing about his involvement in the deaths. The possibility that he was simply the latest victim of circumstances beyond his control deserved serious consideration. "My client came to Bear Creek seeking honest work," Crawford argued in preliminary hearings. "He found a productive claim and worked it diligently for months. The fact that others chose to target his successful operation and may have met with violence in the process does not make him responsible for their fate." The prosecution faced significant challenges in building a case against Blackthorne. Despite the discovery of multiple sets of remains, no witnesses had observed any violent acts. No physical evidence directly connected Blackthorne to the deaths. The timeline of the burials suggested that at least some of the killings had occurred before his documented arrival in the territory. Standing Bear's tracking expertise provided the most compelling evidence against Blackthorne. His analysis of ground disturbance patterns around the burial sites suggested systematic activity over an extended period. The careful concealment of remains required detailed knowledge of the terrain and access to tools for digging in rocky soil. The burial sites showed planning and preparation, Standing Bear testified. Someone had selected locations carefully, probably scouted them in advance. The work required time and effort, not something done in panic or haste. However, even Standing Bear's expert testimony could not establish when the burials had occurred or who had performed them. The evidence demonstrated that someone had been systematically killing and burying prospectors in the Bear Creek area, but it could not definitively identify that person as Blackthorne. As winter approached, the investigation faced practical limitations imposed by weather and terrain. Deep snow would soon make access to Bear Creek impossible, forcing any resolution of the case to wait until spring. Blackthorne remained in custody in Virginia City, awaiting trial on multiple charges of murder. The territorial press had begun following the case, with newspapers in Helena and Bannock publishing regular updates on the investigation. Headlines described the Bear Creek murders and Montana's most mysterious criminal case. Public interest in the proceedings grew throughout the winter months, with speculation and rumor often substituting for verified facts. During his confinement, Blackthorne's behavior continued to puzzle those who observed him. Jail guards reported that he maintained a calm demeanor and showed none of the agitation typical of men facing capital charges. He read extensively, wrote lengthy letters to unknown correspondents, and engaged in philosophical discussions with visitors. "Blackthorne was the most unusual prisoner I ever supervised," recalled jailer Samuel Phillips years later. "He acted like a man with a clear conscience, not someone facing the gallows. Either he was innocent or he was the coldest killer I ever met." The winter of 1857 to 1858 proved unusually harsh, with heavy snowfall beginning in November and continuing through March. Travel to Bear Creek became impossible, effectively suspending the investigation until spring. During this period, additional information about the case emerged through interviews with prospectors who had worked in the region during previous years. These interviews revealed a disturbing pattern of disappearances and mysterious accidents dating back to the earliest days of mining activity in the Bear Creek drainage. Stories emerged of prospectors who had reported rich discoveries, only to disappear before others could verify their claims. In several cases, Subsequent visitors to the area had found evidence of recent mining activity, but no sign of the miners themselves. "It was like the mountain was eating people," recalled veteran prospector Thomas Kelly. "Every season, men would go up Bear Creek, chasing rumors of big strikes. Some would come back broke and empty-handed, others would just never be seen again." The accumulated testimony suggested that Bear Creek had been a death trap for solitary prospectors long before Blackthorn's arrival. The discovery of remains dating back several years supported this theory, implying that either multiple killers had operated in the area or that one person had been active there much longer than initially believed. Spring arrived late in 1858, but by May, investigators were able to return to Bear Creek for a more thorough examination of the area. The winter snowmelt had revealed additional evidence, including mining equipment and personal belongings scattered throughout the valley. Some items appeared to have been exposed by spring floods, suggesting more burial sites remained undiscovered. The expanded search revealed the true scope of the carnage that had occurred in the remote valley. Over the course of 3 weeks, investigators located remains of at least 14 individuals in various burial sites throughout the drainage. The careful concealment of the bodies and the systematic nature of their disposal suggested a well-organized operation rather than random violence. More significantly, the investigation revealed evidence of an elaborate trap system designed to capture and kill prospectors. Hidden pits, carefully concealed along main trails, contained sharpened stakes at their bottoms. Trigger mechanisms constructed from local materials could cause rockfalls to block escape routes. The sophistication of these devices indicated detailed planning and considerable time investment. Whoever built these traps knew the country like a native and understood how prospectors would move through the terrain, Standing Bear observed. They had studied human behavior as carefully as they had studied the landscape. The discovery of the trap system provided the first clear evidence of premeditated murder rather than crimes of opportunity. However, it also raised new questions about Blackthorn's involvement. The trap showed signs of age and weathering that suggested construction over multiple seasons. Some appeared to predate Blackthorn's documented arrival in the territory by several years. Defense attorney Crawford argued that the evidence actually supported his client's innocence. If Blackthorn had inherited an existing killing operation, his cooperation with investigators and apparent surprise at the discoveries made more sense. A guilty man would not have willingly assisted law enforcement in uncovering evidence of his crimes. The trap system demonstrates that someone had been murdering prospectors in Bear Creek long before my client arrived, Crawford argued in court filings. The fact that he chose to establish his claim in this valley may have been the greatest misfortune of his life, but it does not make him guilty of crimes committed by others. Prosecutors countered that Blackthorn's detailed knowledge of the terrain and his suspicious behavior during the investigation suggested he had taken over and continued an existing operation. His arrival coincided with a resumption of disappearances after a brief lull in reported incidents. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. The case went to trial in July of 1858, drawing observers from throughout the territory. The prosecution presented evidence of the multiple burials, the sophisticated trap system, and Blackthorn's presence in the area during the time period when the recent disappearances occurred. Witnesses testified about his suspicious behavior and the unusual features of his mining operation. The defense argued that all evidence against Blackthorn was circumstantial and could be explained by his misfortune in choosing a location previously used by unknown killers. Character witnesses testified to his peaceful demeanor and cooperative attitude during the investigation. The lack of any witnesses to violent acts or direct physical evidence linking him to specific murders created reasonable doubt about his guilt. After 3 days of testimony and 6 hours of deliberation, The jury returned a verdict of not guilty on all charges. The foreman later explained that while jurors suspected Blackthorne might have knowledge of the crimes, the prosecution had failed to prove his guilt beyond reasonable doubt. The possibility that he was simply an unlucky victim of circumstances could not be dismissed. The verdict outraged many in the mining community who believed justice had not been served. Public sentiment held that someone responsible for so many deaths should not escape punishment, regardless of legal technicalities. Calls for vigilante action circulated through the mining camps, forcing territorial authorities to provide protection for Blackthorne after his release. Following the trial, Blackthorne left Montana Territory permanently. No reliable records exist of his subsequent whereabouts or activities. Some reports placed him in California during the 1860s, while others suggested he had returned to the eastern states. He effectively vanished from historical records as mysteriously as he had appeared. The Bear Creek area was abandoned by prospectors following the trial and discovery of the trap system. Rumors of ghostly activity and cursed ground discouraged mining activity despite continuing reports of rich gold deposits in the drainage. The valley returned to wilderness, with nature slowly reclaiming the sites where so much violence had occurred. Years later, a few hardy prospectors returned to Bear Creek, drawn by persistent rumors of untapped wealth. Most found nothing more than evidence of previous mining activity and quickly moved on to more promising locations. However, occasional reports continued to emerge of mysterious accidents and unexplained disappearances in the remote valley. In 1865, territorial surveyor Richard Morrison led a mapping expedition through the Bear Creek drainage. His official report noted extensive evidence of previous mining activity, but made no mention of the area's violent history. However, personal letters discovered after Morrison's death revealed his unease about the location and his crew's reluctance to remain there overnight. "There is something deeply wrong about that valley," Morrison wrote to his wife. "The men feel it, though they cannot express exactly what troubles them. We completed our work quickly and left without lingering. Some places are better left undisturbed." The final documented incident at Bear Creek occurred in 1868. Prospector Daniel Hayes, nephew of the missing Robert Hayes, arrived in Virginia City with plans to investigate his uncle's disappearance and possibly work the abandoned claims in the area. Despite warnings from local authorities, Hayes proceeded to Bear Creek with minimal supplies and equipment. Hayes was found 3 weeks later by a passing hunting party, alive but in severely deteriorated condition. He had apparently fallen into one of the concealed pits that had not been discovered during the original investigation. His survival was attributed to rainwater that had collected in the pit, and his ability to catch small animals that fell through the concealed opening. Hayes kept talking about voices calling to him from underground, recalled Dr. William Patterson, who treated him after the rescue. He claimed the mountain was full of tunnels and chambers where the missing men were still alive. We attributed these statements to delirium caused by his ordeal. Hayes recovered physically from his experience, but remained convinced that the Bear Creek area concealed secrets beyond those discovered by investigators. He spent his remaining years researching the history of mining activity in the region and corresponding with relatives of missing prospectors. His extensive notes and maps were donated to the Territorial Archives after his death in 1873. Modern analysis of Hayes's research suggests he may have discovered evidence of mining operations that predated the known period of prospector disappearances. References in his notes to Spanish workings and old diggings showing foreign methods hint at possible earlier activity in the area. However, no physical evidence has been located to support these theories. The Bear Creek case remains officially unsolved. While Uriah Blackthorne was acquitted of murder charges, No alternative explanation for the systematic killing of prospectors has ever been established. The sophisticated nature of the trap system and the extended period over which the murders occurred suggest careful planning and detailed knowledge of both terrain and human behavior. Several theories have been proposed to explain the Bear Creek murders. Some investigators believed that a group of claim jumpers had established a systematic operation to rob and kill prospectors, using reports of rich strikes to lure victims to the remote area. Others suggested that a single individual, possibly someone with military or engineering background, had developed the elaborate killing system as a means of acquiring gold and supplies from victims. The most disturbing possibility, supported by the evidence of prolonged activity and sophisticated methods, is that the Bear Creek area served as a testing ground for someone experimenting with different techniques for killing and disposing of human beings. The isolated location, predictable victim pool, and natural advantages of the terrain would have provided ideal conditions for such experimentation. What remains indisputable is that at least 14 men died violently in the Bear Creek area during the 1850s, their bodies carefully concealed and their disappearances systematically covered up. The person or persons responsible for these crimes possessed detailed knowledge of mining operations, human psychology, and engineering principles that allowed them to operate undetected for several years. The case file remains open in the Montana State Archives, though no active investigation has been conducted since the 1860s. Occasional researchers have examined the evidence, seeking new insights or overlooked clues that might finally solve the mystery. However, the passage of time and the remote location of the crimes make resolution increasingly unlikely. Uriah Blackthorn's role in the Bear Creek murders may never be definitively established. His acquittal reflected the legal standard of proof beyond reasonable doubt, not necessarily a determination of innocence. The circumstances of his presence at the location during active killing, his detailed knowledge of the terrain, and his suspicious behavior during the investigation continue to raise questions about his involvement. Whether Blackthorn was a victim of circumstance, an unwilling witness to someone else's crimes, or the mastermind behind a systematic killing operation, remains one of Montana Territory's most enduring mysteries. The truth died with the last person who possessed first-hand knowledge of what really happened in that remote valley during the bloody summer of 1857. The legacy of Bear Creek extends beyond the immediate victims and their families. The case highlighted the vulnerability of solitary prospectors working in remote areas and the limitations of law enforcement in frontier territories. It also demonstrated how isolated locations could provide perfect cover for criminal enterprises that might have been impossible in more populated areas. For students of criminal behavior, the Bear Creek case offers a disturbing example of systematic predation that predated modern understanding of serial killing. The careful planning, sophisticated methods, and extended timeline suggest a level of organization and psychological detachment that was virtually unknown in documented cases of that period. The mountain where Uriah Blackthorn worked his claim still rises above the Bear Creek drainage, unchanged by the passage of more than a century. Snow falls on the same slopes where men died screaming for help that never came. The wind still moves through the pines, carrying sounds that might be mistaken for human voices by anyone foolish enough to listen closely. Local guides continue to avoid the area, though few remember the specific reasons why. Old-timers speak of bad luck that follows anyone who camps near certain landmarks, and hunting parties report unease when passing through the valley. Whether these feelings reflect genuine supernatural activity or simply the persistence of cultural memory, the effect remains the same. Bear Creek stays largely empty of human presence, and perhaps that is for the best. Some places accumulate too much darkness to ever be truly safe again. Some secrets are too terrible to uncover completely. In the case of Bear Creek, the mountain keeps its mysteries, and the dead keep their silence, and the truth remains buried as deeply as the bones in that remote Montana valley. The last word belongs to territorial investigator Henry Morrison, who wrote in his final report, "We recovered what remains we could find, and we brought what justice the law allowed. But I fear the real truth about Bear Creek died with whoever planned and executed those crimes. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved by mortal men, and some places are not meant to be fully understood." The case was officially closed in 1869, when the territorial government declared that all reasonable investigative efforts had been exhausted. No new evidence has emerged since that time, and no credible leads have developed, despite occasional renewed interest from historians and true crime researchers. Bear Creek runs as clear and cold as it did in 1857, washing over rocks that once concealed the bones of murdered men. The gold that drew them to their deaths still glitters in the gravel beds, waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to try their luck in that cursed valley. But the miners don't come anymore, and the mountain man's trap has finally been sprung for the last time, leaving only silence and the eternal sound of running water to mark where so many dreams ended in darkness. The final entry in the territorial records appears in a weathered logbook dated December 15th, 1869. A notation by Clerk Joseph Manning reads simply, "Bear Creek matter. Investigation concluded. File archived pending new evidence." Below this, in different handwriting, someone had added, "Evidence destroyed per territorial order. Security concerns." What those security concerns might have been remains unclear. Some historians suggest that territorial authorities wanted to suppress details about the sophisticated trap system to prevent copycat crimes. Others believe political pressure from mining interests led to the burial of information that might discourage prospecting in other remote areas. Standing Bear, the tracker whose expertise had proven crucial to the investigation, left Montana Territory in 1870 and returned to his tribal lands. Before departing, he spoke to Father Mueller about his experiences at Bear Creek. The priest recorded their conversation in his personal journal, discovered decades later among church archives. "He told me the mountain was sick," Father Mueller wrote, "not cursed or haunted as some claimed, but sick in the way a man becomes sick when evil has lived too long in his heart. He said the land itself would need time to heal, maybe generations, before it could be safe for human habitation again." The Bear Creek drainage remained largely untouched through the remainder of the 19th century. Occasionally, survey parties or hunting expeditions passed through the area, but none reported any unusual discoveries or experiences. Nature slowly reclaimed the mining sites, the trap locations, and the burial grounds where so many had met violent ends. In 1912, the area briefly attracted attention when railroad surveyors proposed a route through the valley. Local opposition, led by descendants of 1850s-era residents who still remembered the Bear Creek murders, successfully lobbied to have the route relocated. The official reason given was unstable geological conditions, but correspondence between survey officials reveals awareness of the area's violent history. The last documented visit to Blackthorn's former claim occurred in 1937, when historian Margaret Davidson attempted to locate physical evidence for her research on territorial-era crime. She found only scattered pieces of rusted mining equipment and stone foundations, marking where buildings had once stood. Her published account noted an oppressive atmosphere that made her eager to leave before nightfall. "There are places," Davidson wrote, "where human suffering has left an imprint that transcends normal understanding. Bear Creek is such a place. Whether one believes in supernatural influences or simply acknowledges the psychological weight of historical trauma, the effect is the same, an overwhelming sense that this valley has witnessed too much death." Modern law enforcement databases contain no record of the Bear Creek case, as digitization efforts focused on more recent crimes. The physical evidence, bones, personal effects, and documentation disappeared during a warehouse fire in 1953 that destroyed much of the territorial archive. Whether this fire was accidental or deliberate remains another unsolved mystery. Today, Bear Creek appears on topographical maps as an unnamed drainage in the Tobacco Root Mountains. No roads provide easy access, and hiking trails bypass the valley entirely. The few people who know its history prefer to keep that knowledge private, understanding that some stories are better left untold. On quiet winter nights, when snow muffles all sound except the whisper of wind through bare branches, old-timers in nearby towns sometimes speak of lights seen moving through the Bear Creek Valley. These accounts invariably come from people traveling late on distant ridgelines, too far away to investigate what they observed. Whether these lights represent natural phenomena, human activity, or something else entirely, they serve as a reminder that Bear Creek continues to hold its secrets. The mountain man, who may or may not have been Uriah Blackthorne, built a trap that worked perfectly for its intended purpose. It caught every claim jumper who entered that cursed valley. But the most perfect trap of all was Bear Creek itself, a place that drew men with promises of gold and kept them forever in graves that will never be marked, in a silence that will never be broken, under a mountain that remembers everything and forgives nothing. And in the end, perhaps that is justice enough.